Alien Girl watched the human take the front alone, but his soft reason for doing so shifted her. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main characters. The night was unlike any other on Earth, at least to someone like Lyra. She was far from home, a long way from the starry skies of her own planet, stranded on this unfamiliar world, watching everything she once thought she understood with new eyes. From her vantage point in the corner of the crowded plaza, Lyra watched Ethan Matthews, a human with a calm and quiet demeanor, as he stood at the front of a long line of people. He wasn't tall, nor particularly strong-looking, but there was something about him that seemed to draw attention. He had a quiet strength that stood in stark contrast to the chaos around him. It was a large crowd gathered for a demonstration of sorts, but as Lyra observed him, she couldn't shake the sense that Ethan wasn't simply there to blend in. He was standing in the front, alone, without a single companion by his side. The others in line were whispering, some even stepping back, glancing at each other with confusion and uncertainty. But Ethan, for some reason, did not flinch. He held his position as if he had no doubt in his mind about what he was doing. Lyra, with her alien perspective, couldn't understand it. She had seen many strange things in her travels, but this human's calm in the face of uncertainty intrigued her. There was something different about him. What could make a human stand so firmly when the rest of the world hesitated? She watched for several minutes, her curiosity growing, yet still unsure of what drove him. Ethan remained silent, his face expressionless, but his eyes seemed to tell a different story, a story that Lyra was eager to understand. She had learned much about the human species, but they were complex, difficult to decode. This simple act of bravery, or was it defiance, made her question everything she knew. Lyra leaned forward slightly, her gaze fixed on him. There had to be something more, something beyond the surface of this situation. Why was he doing this? Was it for the thrill of it? Or was it something more profound? And what was it about his presence that made the crowd nervous, yet also oddly hopeful? The more Lyra thought about it, the more she found herself drawn to this strange human. It wasn't just his actions that intrigued her, it was his reason. The soft, almost imperceptible reason that he had chosen to stand in the front, alone, in the face of whatever was to come. What could make someone do such a thing without hesitation? She didn't know yet, but she was determined to find out. And so, for the first time since she had arrived on this planet, Lyra felt a stirring of something she had never experienced before: empathy. As Lyra continued to observe Ethan from her hidden spot, the crowd began to murmur more loudly, shifting uneasily. They were all waiting for something to happen, a moment of action or a speech, but Ethan remained calm, as if he were simply part of the scenery. The strange thing was, this quiet resolve of his seemed to calm the people around him. Despite the rising tension, they began to relax, almost unconsciously following his lead. Lyra couldn't understand it. How could someone who appeared so ordinary hold so much influence over an entire group? What was it about him that made them feel safe, despite the unknown situation that loomed? Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of Ethan's soft voice. He didn't raise it to command attention, but instead spoke in a tone that seemed to hold everyone's attention without effort. "The world is changing," he said, his words carrying a weight far greater than the situation would suggest. "And we can choose to face it together, or we can be left behind. I choose to stand here, for all of us. No one should have to face the unknown alone." His voice was steady, not loud but firm, with a sincerity that could not be faked. It was as if he was speaking directly to every person in the crowd, not just to himself. Lyra's heart skipped a beat. She had watched many beings speak to crowds before, but none with this level of calmness and vulnerability. There was no ego, no show of force, just a simple, quiet conviction. It was not an order, it was an invitation. The crowd, as if moved by the gentleness of his words, slowly began to quiet down, their anxious whispers replaced by a profound silence. For a moment, it felt like time itself had stopped. Lyra leaned forward, her gaze locked on Ethan. She had never encountered anything like this before. His ability to bring peace with nothing more than a few words felt almost alien to her, in the best way. Back home, things were different. People lived by the law of power, survival, and dominance. But Ethan wasn't leading by force. He was leading by empathy, by understanding. There was something extraordinary about the way he connected with the people around him. And for the first time, Lyra felt something stir deep inside her, something she didn't fully understand. She had been taught that emotions were a weakness, a distraction. But watching Ethan, seeing the calmness in his expression, the way his words resonated with those around him, Lyra started to wonder if maybe, just maybe, emotions could be a strength. She shifted slightly, careful not to draw attention to herself. Her mind raced as she tried to make sense of what she was witnessing. She had been trained to observe, to learn, but this was something she had never encountered. Ethan's quiet strength, his soft reason for standing at the front, was unlike anything she could have imagined. As she pondered his actions, she realized that his choice to face the unknown, to stand alone in the front, wasn't out of arrogance or pride. It was out of compassion, a deep desire to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. He wasn't asking for anything in return. He was simply showing them a better way. Lyra felt a strange pull in her chest. It wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was something deeper, something she had never felt before. A longing to understand, to connect. The feeling was foreign, but also strangely comforting. She had always been an outsider, never fully fitting in anywhere. But watching Ethan, she wondered if maybe, just maybe, there was more to this human world than she had initially believed. The crowd stood in a heavy silence, the weight of Ethan's words lingering in the air like a soft breeze. Lyra felt the tension in her own chest loosen as she watched the subtle shift in the people around him. Their previous unease seemed to melt away, replaced by a collective sense of calm, as if his quiet strength had touched something deep within them. It was strange, and yet profoundly moving. For the first time since her arrival on Earth, Lyra felt something akin to hope stirring within her. She had come here to observe, to learn about the human race. But what she was witnessing now was more than she had anticipated. It wasn't just about survival or strength. It wasn't about power. It was about connection. Ethan had a gift, one that she couldn't quite grasp, but it was undeniable. His words had a power to them, a power that didn't come from force or authority, but from understanding. Lyra had always been taught that strength was something to be earned, something that could be measured and weighed. But Ethan, this human, showed her that strength could also be quiet, gentle, and rooted in empathy. She watched as the crowd, once full of uncertainty, began to move forward. They stepped closer to him, as if drawn to the calm aura that seemed to surround him. Some of them looked at him with newfound respect, while others seemed to have a sense of gratitude in their eyes, as if they were thankful for the way he had steadied their nerves without even trying. Lyra couldn't help but wonder how this would have played out on her own world. Back home, situations like this were handled differently. Leaders were chosen based on their ability to command, to dominate, to control. The more forceful, the more powerful, the more respected. But Ethan was different. He had no armor, no weapons, no grand gestures. All he had was his presence, his words, and his sincerity. That was enough. As Lyra processed this, she felt a strange longing. She longed to understand him, to understand humans, to understand why they seemed to value something she had always considered a weakness, vulnerability. She had seen vulnerability before, but never in a way that could inspire such change. Perhaps it wasn't weakness after all. Perhaps it was the very thing that made Ethan and the people around him stronger. As the crowd slowly dispersed, Lyra remained in her spot, lost in thought. She had come here to observe and gather information, but what she was learning now was far beyond anything she had imagined. Her mission was to understand the human race, but what she didn't realize was that, in the process, she was also discovering something about herself. She had always seen herself as an outsider, never fully part of anything, floating on the fringes of the world she came from. But here, watching Ethan and the way he had moved those around him, Lyra wondered if maybe, just maybe, there was more to her own existence than she had ever realized. Perhaps, like Ethan, she too could find strength in softness, in connection, in understanding. She wasn't sure yet, but for the first time, She felt like there was hope for that possibility. Ethan's quiet courage had opened something inside her, a door she had never thought to open before. She wasn't sure where this journey would lead, but she knew one thing for certain. She would never look at humans, or at herself, the same way again. I have been watching them for days now, studying them, trying to figure out what makes them so different, so resilient. Humans, that is. I had never seen a species like this, so unpredictable, so fragile, yet so strong. It's strange how they can stumble and fall, and yet, without fail, they get back up again. Ethan was no different. His quiet courage had already made an impact on me, but there was still so much I didn't understand. I had to know more. The next morning, as the sun began to rise over the city, I found myself standing near the same plaza where I had first seen Ethan. The crowd from the other day had long since dispersed, but I was drawn back here, drawn to him, to see if the same quiet resolve would appear again. I watched from a distance as Ethan walked into the plaza, his hands tucked into the pockets of his jacket, his head lowered slightly as he thought. He wasn't speaking to anyone, nor did he seem to be preparing for anything. He was simply there, existing in the moment. I watched him for what felt like hours, waiting for something to change, for him to do something extraordinary. But nothing happened. He just walked, slow and deliberate, as though he were trying to figure something out. As I observed him, I felt a strange pull, a connection I couldn't explain. It was as if, through the simple act of being, he was showing me something. It wasn't about grand gestures or words that moved mountains. It was about presence. Ethan was present, fully and completely, in a way I had never seen before. There was no rush in his steps, no sign of anxiety or fear. It was as if he knew exactly where he was supposed to be, and in that certainty, he radiated something calming. It was a quiet power, but it was powerful nonetheless. I didn't realize it at first, but I had slowly moved closer to him, my curiosity pulling me forward until I was standing just a few feet away. I hesitated, unsure if I should approach. What could I possibly say to someone like him? What could I ask that would make sense? But Ethan wasn't concerned with any of that. He simply looked up, his gaze meeting mine for the briefest of moments, and then he smiled. It wasn't a large smile, but it was warm, genuine. In that instant, I felt something shift inside me, something I had been avoiding for so long. I had always kept my distance from others, never letting anyone in. But here, now, with Ethan's quiet presence, I realized that maybe it was okay to let someone in. Maybe it was okay to be vulnerable. It's not about the big moments, he said quietly, his voice carrying the same calmness that had drawn me to him. It's about the small things. The quiet moments when you just exist. You don't need to be anything but yourself. His words were simple, but they hit me in a way I hadn't expected. I had spent so much time analyzing, studying, and observing, thinking that strength came from knowledge and power. But here was Ethan, showing me that it wasn't about any of those things. It was about being present, being real, being human. I couldn't help but feel a sense of peace wash over me, a peace I hadn't felt in a long time. Ethan's words lingered in my mind, like a melody that wouldn't fade. I had thought I came to this planet to learn about humans, but now, I realized that in some strange way, I was learning about myself. And for the first time, I was okay with that. The days passed, and the more I observed, the more I began to realize that my understanding of this world was changing. I had come here with a singular purpose, to study, to observe, to analyze. But as I watched Ethan, I started to see something else, a depth to humanity that I hadn't expected. It wasn't about the grand gestures or the heroic feats that I had read about in the records of this planet. It was about the quiet moments, the ones that seemed insignificant to most, but held the real power. It was in the way humans carried themselves in the mundane, the small choices they made each day. Ethan's words kept echoing in my mind. It's about the small things, the quiet moments when you just exist. I had never thought about it that way. Back home, everything had been about survival, about making the right moves, about proving yourself through action. But here, on Earth, it seemed as though strength was born not just from what you did, but from how you existed. It was in your ability to simply be, to be present, and to connect. It was a lesson I wasn't sure I was ready to learn. The next day, I found myself back in the same plaza, as if something in me had drawn me there once again. Ethan was already there, sitting on a bench, looking out at the street. He wasn't doing anything particularly noteworthy. He wasn't giving a speech or making any sort of proclamation. He was just there. I hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to approach him. I didn't know if I had the right words, if I could even express what I had been feeling. But somehow, I found myself walking over to him. He looked up as I approached, that same soft, understanding smile crossing his face. There was no judgment, no expectation, just acceptance. "Hey," I said, my voice almost unsure. "Hi," he replied, his voice as calm as ever. "I've been watching you," I blurted out before I could stop myself. "Watching me?" He raised an eyebrow, clearly amused. "Why?" "I don't understand," I admitted, feeling vulnerable in a way I wasn't accustomed to. "I've been studying your people, and I thought I knew what to expect, but you're different. You're not like what I thought humans would be." Ethan didn't respond right away. He simply looked at me, his expression thoughtful, as if he were carefully considering what I had said. "You're not from around here, are you?" he asked after a moment, his tone gentle. I nodded, unsure of how much I should reveal. "No, I'm not. I figured," he said with a soft chuckle. "You've been observing us for a while, haven't you?" I nodded again, feeling a strange mix of embarrassment and relief. "I don't understand your world," I said quietly. "I don't understand how you all live, why you do the things you do. I thought it was all about power and survival, but now, I'm not so sure." Ethan sat up a little straighter on the bench, his gaze still fixed on me. "It's not all about power," he said. "It's about connection. It's about understanding. It's about being present in each moment, no matter how small." His words were simple, but they resonated in a way I hadn't expected. I had been so focused on the external, on what could be measured, what could be observed from a distance. But what Ethan was saying was different. It was about the quiet moments that happened when no one was looking, the ones that didn't leave any lasting mark on the world, but shaped the people who lived in it. "You don't have to understand everything," he continued, his voice soft but firm. "Sometimes, it's enough just to be here. To be a part of it all, in whatever way you can. That's what makes us human. We connect. We feel. We grow." I didn't know what to say. I felt as though the weight of his words was sinking in, slowly but surely, making its way into my understanding. It was the first time I had truly listened, the first time I had let go of my need to analyze and simply let myself feel. Ethan's words weren't meant to be grand or profound, but they had changed something inside me. They had opened a door I hadn't even realized was closed. And for the first time, I understood what it meant to be part of something greater, something beyond just survival. It was about connection. And in that moment, I felt like I had taken the first step toward understanding what it meant to be truly alive. I spent the next few days reflecting on Ethan's words, trying to understand their meaning, trying to figure out how they applied to my own life. I had never thought about life in this way before. Back home, everything was about logic, calculation, and survival. There were no small moments, no quiet reflections. It was all about strength, power, and proving oneself. But here, on Earth, everything seemed to revolve around connection. Simple, pure, and real. I was still struggling to reconcile these two ways of thinking when I saw Ethan again. It wasn't planned, but somehow, I found myself standing near him, watching as he went about his day. He was sitting on a bench, reading a book, as if the world around him didn't matter. But it was clear to me that he wasn't ignoring the world. He was simply at peace with it. It was as if he had discovered a way to be in the world without being consumed by it. I couldn't understand how he did it, how he was able to simply exist without the constant pressure of needing to achieve or control. But I knew I had to ask. I walked up to him slowly, unsure of what to say. Ethan looked up from his book, his eyes meeting mine with that same warmth. "Hey," he said, offering me a gentle smile. "How are you?" I hesitated for a moment. "I've been thinking," I said, my voice quieter than usual. "About what you said. About the small things, the moments when you just exist." Ethan nodded, setting his book down. "Yeah. I don't understand how you do it," I admitted, the words feeling heavier than I expected. "How do you live like that, without always trying to prove yourself, without always needing to be something more?" He considered my words for a long moment, and then, as if weighing his response carefully, he said, "It's not about being something more. It's about accepting who you are in the moment. The world doesn't need you to be perfect or always on top of everything. Sometimes, just being present is enough." I looked at him, trying to comprehend what he meant. But how do you let go of the need to be something? It's not easy, he said quietly, his gaze distant for a moment, as though he were lost in thought. I used to think I needed to be more, stronger, smarter, more accomplished. But then I realized that none of that was making me happy. I was chasing things that weren't really mine to chase. He paused, looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. I guess it just took time. Time to understand that the things that truly matter are the things we often overlook, the moments we're too busy to appreciate. His words settled in my mind like seeds, slowly beginning to take root. It was hard to imagine letting go of the things I had always considered important. I had spent my life in search of knowledge, control, and power, never stopping to think about what it meant to simply be. But now, as I listened to Ethan, I felt something shift within me. It wasn't all at once, and I didn't have all the answers, but there was a growing understanding, a slow realization that maybe the answers I had been looking for were never about the things I could see, but the things I could feel, their ways. But now, after everything I had witnessed, I was beginning to question everything I had known about my own world, my own people. It was a strange, unsettling feeling. I didn't know how to process it, and yet, at the same time, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. Ethan had taught me something that I wasn't sure I was ready to learn. The power of being present, of feeling connected, was something I had never considered before. It wasn't just a lesson about humanity, it was a lesson about life itself. The more I reflected on our conversations, the more I realized how much I had overlooked in my pursuit of knowledge and control. I had spent so much time focused on the external, on the things I could measure and observe, that I had ignored the internal, the feelings, the quiet moments that made life meaningful. Back home, emotions were seen as weaknesses, something to be suppressed. But here, on Earth, emotions were what connected people, what made them real. And Ethan was a living example of that. I could see it in the way he interacted with others, in the way he moved through the world. He didn't need to prove anything. He didn't need to be anyone other than who he was. And that, somehow, was enough. One evening, as the sun began to set and the sky turned a soft shade of pink, I found myself walking with Ethan again. It wasn't planned, but somehow, our paths had crossed once more. We were heading in the same direction, and for the first time, I didn't feel the need to analyze everything he said or did. I was simply walking beside him, existing in the moment, just as he had taught me. We didn't speak much at first. The silence between us felt comfortable, not awkward. It was as though we didn't need words to understand each other. We simply walked, side by side, enjoying the peace of the evening. You know, Ethan said after a while, breaking the silence, I think sometimes we make life more complicated than it needs to be. I looked at him, curious. How do you mean? We're always chasing after something, trying to be someone we're not, or trying to prove something to others. But in the end, it's the simple things that matter. The quiet moments, the connections we make, the feelings we share. His words were gentle, but there was a weight to them, a wisdom that only came from living a life full of experiences. I nodded slowly, letting his words sink in. It was exactly what I had been learning, but hearing him say it out loud made it feel more real, more grounded. For so long, I had been focused on achieving, on proving myself, on being the best. But now, I realized that there was so much more to life than that. It was about the quiet moments that connected us all. It was about sharing those moments with others, about simply being present and letting ourselves feel. We reached a small park, the trees casting long shadows as the evening light faded. Ethan stopped for a moment, looking up at the sky. I think it's easy to forget how beautiful the world is when we're too busy looking for something more, he said, his voice quiet, but full of meaning. I looked up, following his gaze, and for the first time, I saw the world in a new light. The sky, the trees, the simple sounds of the evening, all of it was beautiful. I had spent so much time focusing on the future, on what was coming next, that I had forgotten to appreciate the present. Maybe that's the point, I said softly, more to myself than to him. Maybe it's about being here, right now. Ethan smiled, his eyes meeting mine. Exactly. In that moment, everything felt clear. I didn't need to know everything about this world, or its people. I didn't need to have all the answers. All I needed to do was live, to feel, and to connect. And somehow, that seemed like enough. The next few days passed in a blur, and I found myself reflecting on everything I had learned so far. I had never expected that my mission to study humans would turn into a journey of self-discovery. Everything I had thought I knew about life, about strength, about connection, it was all being reshaped. It was a strange sensation, as if I were seeing the world through new eyes, eyes that were more open to the beauty of simplicity, to the quiet moments that made life meaningful. Ethan had become more than just someone I observed. He had become a guide, though. He didn't even know it. The lessons he had taught me, through his actions, his words, his very presence, were changing me in ways I couldn't have anticipated. And yet, despite all of this, I still couldn't fully understand why. Why was it that this human, who had no special powers, no extraordinary abilities, could have such a profound effect on me? What made him different from the others? I found myself sitting on a park bench one afternoon, lost in thought, when I saw him again. Ethan was walking slowly through the park, as though he had all the time in the world. He wasn't rushing, wasn't looking over his shoulder, just moving forward with a calm purpose. I stood up and walked toward him, the need to talk to him, to ask him something, bubbling inside me. When he saw me approaching, he gave that familiar, warm smile. "Hey there," he greeted me, his voice light but genuine. "How's it going?" "I've been thinking," I said, stopping in front of him. "About everything. About what you've said, what I've seen. And it's confusing. It's like everything I knew about life is being turned upside down." Ethan raised an eyebrow but didn't interrupt, simply waiting for me to continue. "You talk about being present, about not needing to prove anything, but it's hard for me to understand how to do that. How to just be, without constantly feeling like I have to achieve something, or be someone different. I've always been told that to be strong, you have to have control, power. But you don't need any of that, and you still manage to live your life in a way that makes sense." Ethan looked at me for a long moment, as if he were searching for the right words. Finally, he spoke. "It's not about being someone else. It's about being who you really are, without the pressure of trying to be more than that. It's easy to get caught up in the idea that we have to be perfect, or that we have to constantly prove ourselves. But the truth is, we don't have to be anything other than what we already are. And when you let go of that need to prove something, you realize that life is already enough. It's already meaningful." His words hit me harder than I expected. I had never considered that idea before, that maybe I didn't need to be perfect, that I didn't need to strive for more all the time. It felt freeing, but also frightening. For the first time, I realized how deeply entrenched my belief in control and power had been. I had always thought that without them, I would be lost, unable to survive. But now, Ethan was showing me a different way. "How do you stay so calm?" I asked him, genuinely curious. "How do you stay so centered when everything around you seems to be in constant motion?" Ethan smiled again, a quiet understanding in his eyes. "It's not about staying calm all the time," he said. "It's about knowing that you don't need to control everything. Life will move on, with or without you trying to force it. And when you let go of that need to control, you can start to enjoy it for what it is." His words resonated deeply with me, and for the first time, I felt like I was beginning to understand something I had never even considered before. It wasn't about power or control or proving anything to anyone. It was about living, about experiencing the world as it was, without the constant need to change it or bend it to my will. As we continued walking through the park, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. It wasn't a grand revelation, but it was something real, something I could feel. I wasn't sure where this journey was taking me, but I knew one thing for certain. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of the unknown. I was ready to embrace it, just as it was. The days continued to pass, and with each one, I found myself learning more than I could have imagined. I had come to Earth with a specific mission in mind, to observe and gather information about humans. But now I realized my mission had shifted. It wasn't just about gathering data anymore. It was about understanding. I had always believed that knowledge and control were the keys to survival. But the longer I spent with Ethan, the more I began to see that there was so much more to life than I had ever known. It wasn't about control. It was about living in the moment, about being connected to the world around you, about understanding the importance of those small, quiet moments. And as I thought about it more, I realized how much I had missed in my life. Back home, everything had been about achievement, about moving forward, about pushing boundaries. But now, I was beginning to understand that true strength wasn't about conquering the world. It was about understanding yourself and others, about being present and fully engaged with the world in front of you. It was a lesson that wasn't easy for me to grasp, but it was one that I knew I needed to learn. I had spent so much of my existence on the outside, looking in, analyzing everything from a distance. But Ethan had shown me what it meant to truly experience life, to live it fully. The more I thought about our conversations, the more I realized that what he had said was true. It wasn't about being perfect. It wasn't about constantly striving for more. It was about finding peace in who you are and where you are right now. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of peace within myself. I was no longer focused on the future, on what I needed to do next. I was content to simply be. It wasn't an easy shift, but it was a necessary one. And for the first time, I began to see the world with new eyes. Eyes that weren't focused on the next challenge or the next goal, but on the beauty of the present moment. I walked beside Ethan once more, feeling a sense of calm that I had never felt before. We didn't talk much that day, but the silence between us felt comfortable, natural. It was as if we didn't need words to understand each other. We simply existed together, in that moment, at peace. And for the first time, I realized that maybe, just maybe, this was what it meant to truly live. To live not in the past or the future, but in the present. To live not with the pressure of proving anything, but simply by being who you are. As we walked together, I couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude toward Ethan, toward everything he had taught me. He had shown me a world I had never seen before, a world where connection and presence were the most powerful forces. And for the first time, I felt truly alive, not because of anything I had achieved, but because of everything I had learned about being present, about being connected, and about being human.